That's awesome. I still hear the music out of here. That's great. Hey guys, welcome. So this talk is called Pumping Iron on the Web. I am Jimmy Chimenti. I work on IronRuby and IronPython. They are dynamic language implementations of the Ruby and Python programming languages on the .NET framework. They're both open source under the Microsoft public license, available on Codeplex to download. I also work on the dynamic language runtime, working mainly on integrating the web features, which is why I'm here to talk to you today about both these languages on the web. So today, really, I'm talking just about how you can embrace dynamic languages on the web. Right? .NET developers don't. There's not a lot of traction using dynamic languages just in .NET in general, though these languages exist in other ones. So I kind of want to give you my spiel of why I think the developer ecosystem of .NET developers should care, right, about dynamic languages at all. But first, let's take a quick detour. Everyone asks me what iron means, and I'm just going to tell you right now there's no meaning. There's no decided meaning. I will make a statement today and say this is the meaning, but this is not what it used to. This is not what it was intended to mean, right? So Jim Huguenin started this company, Want of a Nail. This is his story. This is his explanation. It's on Stack Overflow if you want to read it. I'm not going to talk about it. This is what it means. It means implementation running on .NET. We didn't think of it that way. It was just he liked the word iron, but that's what it is. So, case closed. All right. So again, embracing dynamic languages on .NET. Why do I think you should care? So web developers seem to gravitate towards simpler programming models. I think that's a fair enough statement. If you think about the web itself as a platform, it was pretty attractive. The instant deployment, the just very sparse markup scripts. It was a pretty attractive platform for developers to use in general because it was easy to use. That meant people who weren't developers became developers because it was easier to kind of grasp. But that doesn't mean that people aren't trying to make it better, right? There's a whole ecosystem of server-side, client-side tools that exist to make that experience of using HTML and CSS and JavaScript and some type of server-side thing better. And really, these things have evolved over the past whatever 20+ years of the web, and the websites we see today really are because these frameworks exist. Yeah. So really, all those frameworks are about getting things done, though, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear to agree. We have a certain web development model, and there's something else that needed to be added to make it better for some certain set of developers, and that's why all these frameworks exist. But really, what I feel like the key point is that they're able to choose how they do it, right? It's not that they're stuck with one framework or one programming language. They have many programming languages at their disposal. Their current problem may have not been thought of by someone else, right? And they might be able to use some other tool. And in fact, my kind of feeling about this whole thing is it's really the programming language that gives the power. Those frameworks are cool and all, but it's really the programming languages underneath these guys that are really the important part. And I don't know why it fast-forwarded through that. Ruby, Python, JavaScript, PHP. I mean, I think we can say that they've made their mark on the web as far as web developers using them and feeling good about using them. Now, we're all .NET developers, presumably. That's why we came to MIX. And that's why you're probably listening to some guy from Microsoft talk about dynamic languages. And you want to get things done, too. Now, again, I said really language choice is what gives you power. So on .NET, what language choices do we have? And it turns out we have a couple. We have two that are mainly used. We have one that's new and another language that is not .NET based, but we use it anyway, so I put it on the slide not to leave it out. Now, this was the slide from before, and that's that slide and that slide. And now, is there some type of difference you see? It seems to be static versus dynamic. Now, that first slide wasn't all dynamic languages, but the majority of them were. And why is .NET very static where the rest of the web seems to be dynamic? That seems to be a disjoint. That seems to be an issue to me. And if .NET had choice, right, we could use them together. And that would be nice. We could basically use all of these frameworks that have been worked on over the past X number of years that the web has been around, that developers love using. And if you have a certain problem and you say, yes, I want to use turbo gears for this specific problem, you should be able to as a .NET developer. And wouldn't it be great if we lived in that world? Right? And part of this talk is to show you that, yes, we do, in fact, live in that world. Given that there are a lot of these, a lot of implementations of certain dynamic languages do exist on .NET, we can live in the world where you can use Phalange, which is a PHP implementation on .NET. You can use a JavaScript implementation on .NET. You can use Ruby and Python, along with C# and VB. And if .NET is your framework of choice, you should be able to use those frameworks, those web frameworks, right? So kind of the point of that whole 5-minute spiel was, embracing dynamic languages on the web is possible as a .NET developer. So the rest of the talk is going to be about why you would want to do that. Now, the first set of arguments I will make is that let's just think about making your entire web development experience simpler. Basically, looking at the web development experience dynamic languages gives you and show you how you can use that on .NET, right? So we'll start with the server. And we'll look at the server. We'll look at the client. Start with the server, and this will be kind of Ruby and Python 101 as well, in case I assume people are slightly less familiar with Ruby or Python compared to C#, right? So I don't have to kind of instruct you on that. Now, there's an interesting web framework called Sinatra. And this is the Hello World app in Sinatra. It's pretty easy to read. Get the root of the page, and what does it do? It does Hello World, right? Or that's what it renders. If there's C# people in the crowd, you can write it like this too. So if you like curly braces, this is fine for you, right? Now, the interesting part about this is that it highlights a lot of Ruby's DSL features, right? Specifically internal DSL features, where an internal DSL is defined as some type of domain-specific language that exists inside another programming language, and you basically build an API that could be considered a DSL. Right? If you look at the get method, that's actually a method. It just happens to be a method that accepts an argument, /, and then it also accepts this implicit lambda between the do and end block. And it doesn't have parentheses around the /, right? So it almost looks like get is a keyword. And that's one of the language powers of Ruby, is that you can kind of build these not traditional APIs and make things that look rather pretty. Now, just to understand what that did, this is another version of that with more verbose language features, right? Using none of the pretty Ruby language features, this is what this would look like. So basically, you have to define a method that returns a string, and then you have to register that method, where the method gives you a pointer to the method. And you have to register with some URL, right? So, you compare the two, right? It's better to have the latter, right? Or the former, I should say. Now, not to leave Python out, Python can do this in its own way using decorators. So what a decorator is essentially a function that can wrap another function and change its behavior. So in this case, this would be the equivalent meaning to the one before. It's just Python uses these features a bit differently. In fact, this would be the implementation of that decorator. Basically, it has a function that accepts a URI or some string, and it returns it from that generates a function, right, called get, which then is the actual function that is called. I think I should have put a return _ get here. It's not exactly right, but again, and this is hand wave because this really doesn't exist. This is just me being nice to Python. But the point is, you can do the same in Python, right? These dynamic languages have these ways of expressing DSL-like features in their language, right? This is almost aspect-oriented programming-esque, where you can take a function, wrap another function, and change the initial function's behavior. Again, this is fairly close to what the Ruby version looked like, except you'll notice that that this doesn't have that method prefix to it. In Python, methods are first-class objects. So in fact, get this returns a function, which then you call that subsequent function with the actual passing this function in. So Python, can be a functional language as well. So let me just show you this initial piece of code running. And the point of this kind of drive home the .NET developer end of it. Hold on, where's my IA? Where's it? Kind of drive home the .NET developer end of it. This is actually running on IIS. So all the dynamic languages have support for running, inside of the IIS web server. And Ruby particularly has direct integration with other Ruby frameworks. So you can actually take a Rails application, deploy it on an IIS server, along with an ASP.NET app. It deploys exactly the same way. The reason why I like Sinatra actually is because we use it, IronRuby uses it specifically for statistics tracking. So this is ironruby.info, a website that we use to track our statistics of pass rate compared to actual Ruby. Currently we're about 90% compliant, where Ruby's 97% compliant. It's because the Windows version of Ruby is less compliant than the Linux version of Ruby. The interesting part of this is, just to see some of that code. This is the main controller of that page. Basically, we store a bunch of statistics in a database, and then we have a library that goes fetches it, and we render it with this crazy markup called HAML. This actually generates HTML, but it's white space sensitive, so you don't have to care about closing brackets. I like it a lot, and kind of the point here is that there's these other libraries, other templating libraries like ERB and HAML that are out there that the Ruby community uses in all of their web applications, and for simple websites, this could be really useful. Regardless of what type of framework you're running on, right? So IronRuby enables this to run on IIS as well. So let's take a brief look at Rails. How many of you have ever used Rails? Good, fair amount. So the overview won't be completely necessary. But kind of the point is that this may look a lot like ASP.NET MVC if you're used to it. One of the things you'll notice is that the renders are not explicit; they're implicit. So this will render the index controller if you don't tell it to do something else, where MVC requires an explicit render. Just the fetching models, it's just very readable and not verbose. Ruby's a very nice language in that respect. What's interesting about Rails is migrations, and this is one of these other ideas of a DSL. Is this actually creates your database. This just creates two tables, and it has the logic to create it and also drop it. So you can define these things and then roll it forward, roll it back. And this is a library you could use in your own ASP.NET app or anything if you wanted more control over the kind of versioning of your database. And models are just stupid simple because they do all of this crazy runtime inspection, right? So the post table had a title and a body, but there's no title and body here. There's only defining relationships because this class is actually going to look at your database and runtime and define those methods at startup. So it's actually not going to affect performance of your app in the long run, but a little bit of startup cost to facilitate your development. I think that's a pretty powerful idiom. And like that Sinatra app before, we can run IronRuby can run Rails on IIS as well. So so my machine is freaking out. This is also running on the same web server, right? If it's actually running. Well, that's something else. Well, imagine that could navigate, right? That's not really the point of it. Another interesting part of just Ruby in general is its interactivity. script console is basically an interactive Ruby prompt that gives you your website for you to just write at a console. You don't have to be in debug mode or anything. You can even attach to your production system if you wanted to, which I wouldn't advise. But script console just lets you write basically the same code you saw here. Post all. If you want to find them all, if you want to find the first, if you want to create a new one, lets you write that in an interactive way. So you can play around with that code first, and then kind of iterate on it in some interactive environment. And this is a little bit more of a complex app. I think it's not running anywhere, but I'll just skip that slide then. Anyway, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but more documentation on how to use Rails on IronRuby, as well as other Ruby frameworks, is on IronRuby's website at this URL. We also have support for ASP.NET MVC. So there's an open source project actually started by Phil Hack wanting to do an interesting blog post, and me adding some features, and some people from our team adding features, and then eventually Ivan Portocarrero, who's writing a book about IronRuby, decided to take this project and run with it. So he's been working on it. The last check-in was that's a branch. This isn't up to date. Sorry. Last check-in was a bit of time ago, but it's a good MVC. If you want to write Ruby code but stay on ASP.NET, this is a good option. I'll show a bit of code using this a little later in the talk. We also support ASP.NET, and actually Python supports this first class through an additional library. So it's kind of cute to be able to write IronPython as your language in your ASPX file, and then your code behinds can just be Python, which that's the whole app, right? that's pretty clean, right? That's the app, right? It's just a say hello thing, but that's pretty cool. And I do have just to prove that that's not vaporware. These are actually pictures taken from RailsConf last year. I just imported them because those are the latest pictures I had of Vegas. Because since I've been in Vegas, actually I haven't gone outside, so I'm trying to correct that tonight. But this is a Python based ASPX site, and I guess okay, it's still working. But I've been showing all these things of kind of, I don't know, I like image apps, and not for their aesthetics. I like it because this is actually resizing the thumbnails on the server and stuff, and it seems to be a good overall. I wouldn't say a stress test, but it's a good sample app for us to keep and make sure that things work well. So I tend to write these picture apps. Anyway, so that's IronPython on ASP.NET web forms. Not only can you write, the kind of traditional, if you could take that code behind and throw it inside a ASPX file, kind of make it look a little bit like PHP. We also support interesting data binding inside of controls. So if your data source on a certain control is set to a Python object, you'll be able to use this parenthesis pound syntax to actually dot into the data source. So this data source was set to some image, and it has properties link, alt, source, width, height, right? Makes it really easy to build up that template. And the equivalent in C# is you'd have to call a function and then call those properties as strings. So it's a very late-bound-esque API where you have to pass strings in, and these are just kind of first-class properties. I'm actually going to skip this because I think we're going to be short on time. I may come back to it. We'll just skip it. So that's the server side. Does anyone have any questions about the server side part of things? I want to kind of structure this talk in chunks. None? Cool. Okay. So client side, Silverlight. Let me. Make sure my notes are up synced. So, Ruby and Python, IronRuby and IronPython also work in Silverlight. This is something we test constantly. It's as much of a supported platform as the desktop, and it's it's pretty much hands down the easiest way to develop a Silverlight application. This is on ironpython.net/browser. That's where all of our documentation is for IronPython, and when IronRuby's new website comes up, it'll be there as well. Let me kind of highlight that text or that code a little bit more for you. So basically, the reason why I say it's hands down the best is simply because it just doesn't fight the way the web works. Our first integration with Silverlight was very Silverlight specific, and we felt like that's great for Silverlight developers, but what about those developers who use JavaScript and maybe have a reason to use Silverlight but also want to get that same JavaScript development experience on the web? And that's basically what we're supporting with Python and Ruby. So this is in line, right? We also support the source, and we have a console in the browser as well. So let me just flip over to this. So this is a Python app running in the browser, and that's actually an IronPython console in the browser as well, right? So you got to do the litmus test. You can do a dir of document and see that it has the methods you would expect an HTML document in .NET to have. And what's also interesting is we've had some extensions to things like I know that text box up top is called name. So if I run that, right, that essentially does get element by ID. We can do that lookup dynamically and say if you want to dot into a method, we'll do dot into document. We'll do get element by ID for you. The same with, I think there's a message there, and I can always change that, right? So this is a live console in the browser, and if you notice, the only thing I've added, you probably can't see that. Zoom in. Let's zoom in. There you go. So that was all that was added to my URL to enable that. Just because I've included a file that lets me do that. So it's pretty easy to enable this console during development, play around with things, and throw it back in a file. Kind of the Firebug development experience, if you will. Of just kind of editing your code in the page as you see it. So we also support XAML inline. If anyone's ever used Silverlight 1, which was only JavaScript based, it actually allowed you to put XAML inside of script tags as well and load it like that. And we felt, yeah, why can't you do that too? Not that this whole inline script thing you would want to, but it's good for the demo. Here's a XAML script tag with the script tag a bit bastardized, right? Because it has a width and a height. There's another way you can if you want your HTML to validate, there's another way to do that. Just again, it's a shorter amount of code, and then from there I can just dot into that object and set its text. So let's sorry. So let's walk you through some of the code. So this example, it's network slow. While this is downloading, I'll explain what's going on here. Each application is a very teeny zap, and it actually looks at the script tags you use on the page and downloads the language it sees fit. Right, so it's kind of an automatic deployment thing. If you've used Python on the page, it's going to go download the Python binaries from the web, and if you've used Ruby on the page, it's going to go download the Ruby binaries. So pretty cool. I'm assuming the network was slow, which is why it took a little bit of time to download, since I didn't make sure it was still in my cache. But this app here, and again, the kind of the power of this model is, view source works, and here's the source for this page. Again, all it does is hook an event, hooks the onClick event, and responds to it. Basically changes a message to say hello to what you typed into an input field, right? That name value thing. Pretty straightforward. Or let's not be egotistical, right? So that's as a low mix. You can do this, similar thing with XAML. And I'm purposely keeping these demos simple, right? There'll be flashier ones later. This is kind of the app model tour, right? So again, I'm egotistical, right? And this is actually rendering in XAML. It's actually a Silverlight control that was added there. So for every script tag that's a XAML script tag, there's going to be a Silverlight control that's embedded into the page with that specific width and height where that script tag would be, and the browser lays it out as it sees fit. And just to take a look at that source as well, right? There's some XAML on the page, and again, it's basically exactly the same as that other example was. And lastly, while this is an interesting piece of, not interesting piece of XAML, it might be nice to use something interesting. So this little, the mix mushroom has a bunch of animations defined on it, as well as this little, thing that pops out of its head. And as you see, it's blinking too, which was kicked off by the scripting languages. So I can say, hello MIX10, and it's going to, do a little popping over its head, right, a bubble. And that was basically not much different than the previous code, other than saying, well, instead of inline XAML, I'm going to use this XAML file on my web server, and then I'm going to still have this on-click thing, but I'm going to have this managing my my animations, right? I added some things there. So pretty simple. Oops, sorry. So one of the interesting things about dynamic languages is that they're not just in their own silo. So let's start the slideshow again. So this app is it's actually an app I downloaded online. Guy's last name I can't pronounce. Wrote it. But it's a Mandelbrot generator, and this is written in Python. Except the algorithm to generate the Mandelbrot is not written in Python. It's written in C#. Not because Python's a slow scripting language for computing Mandelbrot sets or computing fractals. In fact, it's one of the fastest scripting languages for computing it. However, it's a scripting language. And the point of this is there's certain operations you're going to do that you really do want a static language for, right? Any type of real number crunching, things like this, right, are going to require you don't want that overhead of method lookup and whatnot in dynamic languages. So one of the things that IronPython is really good at is calling out into CLR code. So basically the C# part of this app is in this DLL, and basically we can add a reference to it, we can import it in Python, then we can call this generate Mandelbrot method on it that is actually written in C# and compiled into that DLL. But we're calling it like it's a Python method, right? So this is Python code. But we're calling it like Mandelbrot base is a Python module, and like generate Mandelbrot is actually a Python object or method. And the reason this is possible is because IronPython, IronRuby, and in fact, the DLR itself enables binding to the .NET framework to basically expose the .NET framework in a way that is acceptable, to the languages. Now, that was user code. You can also, do this with framework code, right? The same facilities make it possible to call, code in Silverlight's code base compared to your own code. So, of course, I've got to have some Silverlight 4 specific feature in here. So this is Tim Heerer's webcam demo, right? And I don't know what just happened. Hold on. Yeah, OK. So webcam works, and that's actually all written in Python, right? So this is the source code in Python to start your webcam. It's essentially the same as it would look in C#, right? Because it is the .NET frame, or it is the APIs in Silverlight that you're calling into. but you're using Python constructs. All right, so that's kind of cool. Let's kill this. Bye, guys. So the only other thing about Silverlight I want to touch on is HTML integration. So I showed, kind of in the beginning, you saw some HTML UI and clicking on things. But Python or Ruby can be used to essentially replace JavaScript as the scripting language. So it doesn't have to be you don't have to write these little islands of code. You can actually write an entire app in Ruby or Python. In fact, again, if we just look at the source of this, this is all basically all coming from this app.rb file. Basically, the whole app is written in Ruby. There's some interesting features that you get because you're using Ruby, and because you can basically use any of the existing Ruby libraries. You can also use those in the web browser. But this is let's hope no one posted nude pictures of themselves under the MIX10 tag. It looks fairly safe. Right, so just a simple picture viewer, and actually uses Lightbox to show each image off. So the kind of the 2 points here are you can use existing Ruby APIs. So remember that I skipped that demo. I might show it later. This is embedded Ruby. It looks a lot like PHP, right? It's a templating language. It actually looks a lot like ASP.NET as well. And this is how Rails does templating for views. And this is running in the browser, right? So I can actually use this templating engine in the browser to generate HTML rather than I don't know, doing string concatenation or something, right? Because that's essentially what this is doing, but it makes it a bit more maintainable. And I can have Ruby code in here that loops through each photo, and then for each photo, I'm spitting out a div, right? I mean, it's a templating engine. And the other cool thing is you don't have to leave any of your JavaScript code behind, right? So because Silverlight supports the HTML DOM bridge between Silverlight and the CLR, we can execute any JavaScript function, right? So Lightbox requires that you start up Lightbox this way, and we can do that from Ruby. Something that we haven't implemented yet is actually just doing window.init Lightbox, right? You should just be able to call that. That's just that should work. It just doesn't today. All right, so that's Silverlight. So the whole time I've kind of been talking about application development, right? You taking an app from scratch and kind of using Ruby and Python to write it. Hope I made the point that that's actually possible and feasible and can be productive. But there is a place for dynamic languages in even your existing applications. And this is kind of my point, right? Static environments and static languages, have to deal with certain dynamic things as well, right? Like databases are very dynamic, right? Like using those migrations, I would consider using those because my database is dynamic. I want to keep them dynamic. Even something like Active Record would be nice. But I'm going to stick to two kind of higher level topics. One of them is testing. So when writing tests, sometimes it's very important to have an interactive environment because how can you make sure your tests are right? How can you keep refreshing your code underneath and make sure your tests pass? So here, dynamic languages can give you a pretty superior experience when testing. And not to boast Ruby's syntax again, but this is an RSpec style test. You might see it a little bit more familiar if I change it to using classes and methods, but I feel this one reads a lot better, right? Because there's these random methods off of arbitrary objects which create asserts. Now that may seem like from a language implementer, right? I realize what this takes and I cringe, but it's a lot better than having to wrap this entire just Boolean expression up in an assert where I could actually execute some type of more richer expression and get a better error message if that fails. Yeah. Yeah, so Cucumber works as well. And you probably could use even all the other Cucumber clones for .NET. I'm actually not going to talk about Cucumber at all, but yeah, Cucumber does work. Question was, does Cucumber work for Ruby? IronRuby. I hope that was registered by my answer. Anyway, so testing's pretty neat. it's a nice syntax, and I want to kind of show a little bit more of the power of Ruby by just showing you what that code, that testing code there, what would be required to actually run it. Sorry. I have too much stuff running in Vim. It takes way too long to run. Anyway, this code is actually what makes that DSL work before, so I just want to spend like 1 minute going through this. That describe method at the top, right, this guy, again, that's a method. Takes a string, does some things, and calls yield. That's where it runs that block. Right, the block is between do and end. And then it executes the it, and it accepts a string, does some stuff, calls some before, and then says yield again, and that's when the body of this can start executing. Now, should exists on every object. So I've taken object, which is the root of the hierarchy of Ruby, and I've added a method should to it. So every object gets should. It returns this specific class instance, right? Positive expectation. And then you can call various methods on that, like be kind of and equal, right? So here's be kind of, here's equal. You can also call, raise is one of them, right? So if you want to catch exceptions. So I don't want to scare you into that writing these DSLs is hard. It's actually pretty easy. So if you actually wanted to write a DSL on top of some .NET code you had, you could. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And the only testing demo I will show, or just I call it more of a screenshot, is because it's already run. This is a Silverlight app. It's a C# Silverlight app, and I'm running tests that are written in this Ruby, RSpec style testing in that console. So this is just a library we provide that runs in Silverlight that you can easily hook up into your app and run these tests. And I actually have some failing tests in here. Not sure why, because I haven't had time to debug why 13 is not equal to 11. But it's kind of interesting. Now that's testing. I want to leave that behind. Rest of the talk is to be about embedding and hosting. So if you have an existing application, how do you actually take Ruby and Python and use it inside of your existing application? And this app actually shows that. If you that's great. So there's Python code in there if you can't see it. Oh, I would like to zoom in, but there you go. So there's actually Python code in this box. And when I call these, I have buttons that correspond to these methods. And when I press these buttons, it actually runs the method against and takes the current value in the calculator as its first argument and returns. The return is what gets set to the out, right? So if I keep running this gets up by 2, and that's going to up by 4, right? And this is actually a live editor. So as I'm changing it, you'll see those buttons disappear as the code becomes valid and invalid. Right, so I can just random name, right? Right, so now Baz is gonna square it, right? So that is all powered by C# code hosting IronPython and giving kind of a programming environment, very minimal programming environment to end users. So let's see how to do that. Oh, I don't want to close that. So for hello world, basically taking Python eval, this is the C# code that is required. Create an engine, which basically represents the Python language, IronPython. The scope in this case, you call engine.create scope, and that happens to be type dynamic. So dynamic is a new keyword and a new type in C#4. Basically says that any method dispatch that happens on this scope variable happens at runtime. So then I can say scope.page equals this. And what it's going to do is it's going to set the page variable on that scope, essentially like a dictionary set, but it's going to happen at runtime to this object. And then inside that string of Python code, inside of engine.execute, I can say page.message.text equals and then hello from Python. And it's going to use that page variable that I set prior because it's going to execute inside of that scope. Right? So 5 lines of code, hello world for Python and C#. If you wanted this to be, you'll notice that I'm actually using a type called Python here. If you wanted it to be language agnostic, be able to switch between Python and Ruby, if you wanted that feature, you can use the more late-bound way of saying create me an engine that is IronPython. Just to geek out for a second, this is a .NET library, which means that you can call it from Python or Ruby. So this is Python. This is actually Ruby code. Yeah, Ruby code that is executing Python code by using the DLR hosting APIs inside of Ruby to then basically get string eval for Python. Right? So if you see where it says Python.execute, because Python is that engine now that I have, I can define a class in Python, and then I can execute it, right? Foo with open curlies instantiates the class, and then bar calls it. So that's kind of awesome. And even more awesome, you have interlanguage calling, right? So I can actually have a foo.py file, and inside of bar.rb, I can import that foo.py file. So IronRuby.require is our own library. It's not Ruby's require, but it also looks for Python files and gives you the Python module. And then you can dot into it using Ruby semantics, which looks really weird, right? Because foo module.foo is constructing that Python object, and then .bar calls the method in there. It does not obey Ruby's idea of creating objects because Python really doesn't have any objects. It just has these methods that you call. So it's kind of cool how that works out. So I think that it's not useful for me to show you these examples just by themselves. I want to show you them in interesting scenarios. So because we see these hosting APIs as being used to extend your applications, right, to make them more powerful for either you, for let's say, customizing your application, right, or giving your end users scripting. So I want to show you an interesting demo, and I wasn't really planning on doing this, but after seeing the Seismic Silverlight implementation, I decided, well, it'd be really nice to have a Python console in there, wouldn't it? So I begged them for a build, and they gave me a build. So I spent a couple hours and got figured what can I do with the DLR and inside of Seismic Desktop. And this is actually a Silverlight app that's starting. This startup time is actually my fault because I wasn't being good about where I was starting up. But basically, I've added this IronPython plugin into Seismic, and you see it lives under the extras. And there's a IronPython console sitting here, right? So you can kind of then understand. Well, now I have I have a programming interface to this application. New. Well, so they may use MEF for their plugin architecture, but I'm just building a plugin and creating Python, right? Well, I might be, but I didn't write the code. They gave me it. I have no idea. I don't know how to use MEF. I've told you that before. I've got this variable here, plugin, and it gave me back an actual type that exists in my plugin. And I got a snippet of code because it's a little bit verbose. What the heck was it? No, 11? Hold on. This is worth the wait. No, it really isn't. So this is just some Python code to dot through their APIs to get to the first item in my timeline, get to the text of it. I didn't do anything to try to clean that up or anything, but you see, so someone's telling me I'm showing Python talking to .NET, right? So someone tweeted that, right? And that was Corey, right? So I can then use this console to play around with the existing application and possibly do some interesting things with it. I don't have any interesting things to do with. My goal is just to get a Python console in here. But you can imagine that, the possibilities here, right? You can actually prototype your plugins this way, and then possibly move them into either C# code or Seismic could support kind of scripts for it. They could have other scripting here. So the possibilities are kind of endless when you think about what can I use for scripting inside of an application. So that's Seismic. How much time do I have left? Yeah, good. Sorry. So kind of one part I want to definitely touch about hosting is that if you haven't gotten it already, Ruby and Python run completely based on this hosting API. When I use or showed you ir.exe before, when I ran code in IIS, when I ran code in Silverlight, those are all managed, static, built with C# or VB applications that run using the DLR hosting API. Right? We don't get anything for free to implement, ASP.NET integration. Right? We have to make our own plugs, take an existing way of extending the infrastructure and then plug in our own application model on top of it using the hosting APIs. So basically everything I'm telling you can do with your own applications, you can do with is what we've done, right? We've used the same APIs. They're no different. The only way, for instance, that Silverlight integration gets the cross-language behavior and scans the page for the HTML tags is because Silverlight is at least extensible enough to let us provide our own application model that we want. And we can use the dynamic language runtime hosting APIs to kind of switch between those two, depending on which language we actually want to execute. So it's really all hosting, everything. We have no hooks into our own compilers that we depend on even for any of these applications. It's just all hosting. So that being said, let's show another interesting hosting example that I want to kind of end the talk with. So anyone know of IronRuby and IronPython story on mobile devices? It's not been very good in the past. We've never run on Compact Framework because of missing namespaces and certain pieces of the BCL that we need. Specifically reflection emit. It's just something that wasn't supported on Windows CE, for example. So we had an option to say, well, we could support it, and there would be a lot of work and there would be limitations, or we could just never support it. And we've always had the kind of idea of never supporting it, with the advent of this thing, it seems like we should really support it, right? So even though I work for Microsoft, I didn't get access to the bits until it was released. So I decided, okay, let's try to hack on it. And I was actually I failed, but Tomas Metasukek on my team succeeded. So what I want to show you is a very, very simple hack. This is a lot of hacking going on to make this work. Oh wait, okay, thanks. But here's a little Ruby console on the Windows Phone, and this is Ruby code. So 10 times I want to print the number, and it's going to go off and run and print it, right? So we actually ran code in the emulator. I actually have no idea if this actually works on the device. Supposedly it should, right? So if anyone has one of these things, I'd like to try it out. But it runs, and let's at least some proof that I'm actually doing this correctly. So system environment OS version. Okay, so that's an interesting feature. underscore and letter means capitalize it. OS version, run. So that's the OS version, right? It's Windows CE. 7, right? That's supposedly the version of the phone. Again, having this REPL is kind of cool, and we're not doing anything really magical here, because I can do system constants. And I can actually see all the constants defined on system, right? So we're actually running code. We're reflecting over the .NET API that's present there and actually able to run some of the code. So this is running in purely interpreted mode. This is how this works. So certain parts of the interpreter don't depend on reflection emit specifically for IronRuby. So this is how this is possible. Again, this is a big hack. I don't know if this will actually be a supported way of doing things, but I thought this was a cool, show you how to do hosting. I think I've got, no, I don't have the code open. So, if you want to see the code of this, ask me, right? But it's nothing really different than what I showed you before. It's the same DLR hosting API code. So, what have we seen? I showed that, Ruby web frameworks do work on IronRuby and IIS, as well as ASP.NET with IronPython. I forgot to call it out, but that calculator thing, the code, is actually persisted with an MVC application written in IronRuby. So I forgot to call that out. I could show the controller if you're curious, but it's anticlimactic. It looks like Ruby code. I showed Ruby and Python working in Silverlight. Showed testing of using Ruby to test a C# Silverlight application. Showed you how to do kind of the one-on-one of hosting, and then a few other goodies with Seismic and the phone. Does this really providing language choice actually simplify .NET? And my feeling again, as I proposed this before, is I feel like that's true because I do think language choice does limit your productivity because it limits the amount of person wants to write X framework. They really like this language. They're going to put all their effort into writing it for that language. So kind of the best software that's written is when the developer is writing in the language of their choice. At least that's kind of my observations. So if you're not able to use those good frameworks, that would be limiting to yourself. And there's going to be something out there that you're going to find productive. Kind of the task is if you think this is interesting, please use dynamic languages in your applications, build your applications, and I'm pretty sure it's going to help you get things done. It does for me. I mean, I'm a Ruby and Python guy, and I choose to write all my web stuff in those, and I just feel much more productive when I'm using them. IronRuby.net is where you can get IronRuby. IronPython.net is where you can get IronPython. All the hosting API documentation and information about for hosters and for language implementers is on dlr.codeplex.com. And then jimmy.chimenti.com is my blog. I post like every time I do a talk. So this talk will be up there hopefully sooner than later because I've got this script written already. I leave you with that. This is I'd like to take questions now, and I'd like to leave you with thinking about how will this help you be a better .NET developer. So, thank you. Okay, questions. Do you guys want to go up to the mics for the recording? What should I do? Or should I just repeat them? Okay, awesome. You guys are lazy. Cool. So you had your hand up. I'll just work through the room. So you can just, say it and I'll repeat it.
Yeah, I asked about studio support for IronRuby the other day, and you said, well, sort of maybe. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I actually didn't talk about Visual Studio support, mainly because I wanted to talk about things that you can actually get in your hands today. But at PyCon 2010, which was last month, we announced IronPython tooling for Visual Studio 2010. So you can file a new project, make an IronPython, either a website, a Silverlight application, a desktop application, WPF application, et cetera. We have a great IntelliSense engine. We do a lot of static analysis to give you good IntelliSense in IronPython. And there's a REPL window inside of VS for kind of doing interactive development, kind of this whole thing I've been kind of touting. Ruby, so that's been written with the mindset of we need to support all DLR languages on this. Basically, we want to have an infrastructure where we can give people the what do they need to build their DLR application on VS, or tooling in VS, and then have write their own language-specific piece, essentially like we did with the DLR. And we're going to plan to do Ruby as well. I just don't have any dates or any type of firm commitments on that. IronRuby release candidate 3 is out, and it's hopefully going to be our last release candidate. And we generally sit on these builds for a month before we declare that they're final. So we have some time to kill. We may be able to do it then. I'm not sure if there's other tasks we're going to need to get done. But I'm just not sure. But you'll know when you see it released. All right. Yes?
How hard is it to get a Rails app that's developed specifically running on an IIS server?
So all these apps, so that pictures app that I ended up not showing, just because IronRuby startup is slower than Ruby startup, so I didn't want to waste time in the talk doing that. It's going to take about 30 seconds or so, so I didn't want to show it. But the throughput is better. But the actually deploying it, it's the same. So we support Active Record. So as long as you've used just the Active Record APIs, it'll just work. And as long as you don't have any dependencies on like Apache or anything else like that, it'll work as well on IIS. So we do support Ruby gems. We just don't support native any gems that have native code in it. So code that's targeted the Ruby C API, we don't support that. It's not something that I think we'll ever support. We may support another way of doing native code interop, like pinvoke for Ruby, but not the Ruby C API. So people are going to have to convert their C API, Ruby C API code to this other new framework. And that's kind of the stance that JRuby has in other language implementations. One of the ImageMagick, I think, is probably the biggest library out there that's going to be an issue. You can use .NET libraries to do the same thing. And I would love someone to wrap, you have the ImageMagick library wrap .NET, so that would just work seamlessly. Just no one's found the need to do that yet. But overall, it's pretty seamless. Any other questions? I saw some other hands. There was not just 2 hands that went up when I said, what should I do? Yeah, sure, Glenn. Yeah.
What realistically, would you run into a lot of constraints? Did you have to do a port for the APIs, the DLR APIs?
It was, so I'm actually not sure. Again, I told you I failed. Because, so first off, we produce delay sign binaries out of our source tree by default. Of course, that's not going to load in the version of, on the Silverlight version, the phone version. So that was my first problem. But I got over that, and then there was just some differences between CLR and the CLR on the phone, and the one we usually build with that just had some issues. If you really want to know, I can get you in touch with Tomas. He can talk to you about it. I mean, we'll probably support building against it. Whether we're comfortable about releasing binaries that work is a different story. For instance, again, without reflection emit, you are limited. You can't inherit from any type of .NET type and expect it to work, because you have to emit a CLR type at that time, and you need reflection emit for that. So there's only limited things we can do with the interpreter, get so far. We can get pure Ruby code to run. We can get interoping with the CLR through the normal reflection APIs. But anytime we have to emit actual IL, we're not going to be able to do that. So that's going to be the limitation. Yep. All right. So there's 2 minutes left, but I'll call it done. I'll be in the comments for a little bit if you want to ask me any questions, in person. All right. So thank you.